Hey everyone, today we're diving into one of the most important novels ever written, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. We're going to explore the anatomy of a cultural collapse, looking at what happens when a whole way of life comes undone. This famous line, it's from the poet W.B. Yeats, but it's so much more than just the novel's title. It is the book's beating, haunting heart. It's a chilling prophecy of what happens when the very core of a society is shattered. So, that's the big question, isn't it? What does that kind of collapse actually look like on a human level? How does an entire world just unravel? And what are the real consequences when that center simply cannot hold?
But this isn't just a history lesson. What Achebe gives us is like a masterful autopsy of a culture. He shows us piece by piece exactly how it was dismantled, and in doing so reveals a legacy that is still shaping our world today in profound ways.
Okay, so to really get this novel, we first have to understand the author's mission. You see, Chinua Achebe wasn't just telling a story. He was waging a war over the narrative of an entire continent.
For centuries, the story told by colonizers was that Africa was the dark continent, a place without real history, without complex culture, basically just primitive and simple. Achebe's mission was to demolish that lie. He set out to tell the story from the inside, to show the world the vibrant, complicated, sophisticated reality of his Igbo people, and to restore their dignity.
And the way he did it was absolutely revolutionary. Think about it. He took the language of the colonizer, English, and he completely made it his own. He wove in Igbo proverbs, rhythms, and ways of seeing the world. He literally forced the English language to speak from an African point of view. It's incredible.
So, let's step inside the world that he built. Let's go to the Igbo village of Umuafia. This is the vibrant center of the story, right before everything began to fall apart.
And you realize pretty quickly, Umuafia was anything but primitive. This was a highly organized society. It had a sophisticated legal system, rich spiritual traditions, and incredibly deep community bonds. Life here was guided by powerful values, hard work, courage, and a profound respect for one another. But here's what's so important. Achebe doesn't paint a perfect picture of some lost paradise. Not at all. He shows us the cracks in the society, the internal fractures. Things like a very rigid idea of masculinity that haunts the main character, Okonkwo, and the way the community treats its outcasts. These were the fault lines that, when pressure was applied, would make the whole thing vulnerable to collapse.
So, how did this world actually fall apart? Well, as Achebe shows us, it was no accident. It was a calculated, systematic dismantling. The strategy was basically a three-pronged attack, designed to sever the culture's roots. First came religion. Missionaries arrived and created deep, painful rifts within families and the community. Then came a new judicial system, which just imposed itself and stripped the traditional elders of all their authority. And finally, a new cash economy was introduced, which completely undermined the old ways of communal farming and sharing. This quote from the novel just captures the whole tragedy perfectly. It wasn't a head-on battle. It was quieter, more insidious. It was like a knife that slipped in and just cut the invisible threads that held their world together, and once those were gone, the entire fabric just unraveled. Now, to understand the human cost of all this, you just have to look at the protagonist, Okonkwo. His entire identity, everything he was forged in the values of his culture: strength, status, and tradition. And it was all driven by this deep, consuming fear of ever being seen as weak. And this is the ultimate tragedy of the book. In the new world that the colonizers create, the very things that made Okonkwo a great man, his strength, his rigid defense of tradition, they become his fatal flaws. The world changed, but he couldn't. And so, that new world broke him.
Through these characters, Achebe shows us three different human responses to this crisis. You've got Okonkwo, who is the tragic, feudal resistance. You have his son, Moye, who represents that generational split. He's drawn to the new ways. And then there's his friend, Obirika, who's like the wise observer, the one who sees the full tragedy for what it is as it's all happening. But the novel doesn't just end with the collapse. No, in the rubble, Achebe shows us the seeds of what's going to come next, the complex, often troubled landscape of the post-colonial world. And maybe the most chilling detail in the entire book comes right at the end. After this entire civilization is destroyed, the district commissioner casually thinks about writing a book on his experiences. The
The title he chooses tells you everything you need to know about the colonial mindset, the pacification of the primitive tribes of the Lower Niger. It's just arrogant, dehumanizing, and completely blind.
And that mindset is the poison pill they left behind. A system that was built on community accountability was just ripped out and replaced with arbitrary, top-down power. This shift laid the foundation for so much of the political instability and corruption that would plague many nations for decades to come. The old center was gone, and a fractured, unstable one was built in its place.
And that is the enduring genius of Things Fall Apart. It's not just a sad story about what was lost. It is a clinical, step-by-step analysis of how it was lost, with brutal, systematic efficiency. And so the novel leaves us with a question that kind of turns the mirror back on us. What are the beliefs, the values, the connections that formed the center of your world? And how fragile is that center really?